I'm Heather Zeitzwolf, Savvy Frugal Vegan. I'm here to help chefpreneurs just like you start, build, and maintain a vegan food business. If you want to have financial success in the vegan mobile food industry, whether it's a cart, food truck, or pop-up, I'm here to help you with business hacks, tips, tricks, and the pitfalls to avoid. Are you ready to map out your business journey? Then put the key in the ignition and let's go for a ride. I discovered you back in 2017 when I bought your book, but now I'm in your university where I'm learning your wonderful techniques, and it just makes it a lot better to interact with the person that is coming up with these recipes.
Totally. That's why I launched that whole program online. I had taught in culinary schools for years, and those classes are prohibitively expensive for most. This way, people from all around the world are involved. It's much more of a two-way street. I'm always looking to cater to the people in that program, teach them what they're excited about, and give them the information in a way that is useful and practical for them. I just enjoy it so much more. It's so much more fun. It doesn't feel like a job to me. It feels very collaborative. We're getting at the ultimate goal of trying to move society closer to nonviolence, and we're working together in that. It really lights me up, and I love that you're part of it, dear Heather.
Thank you. You said in one of your classes, you're like, I learned so much from running that food truck. Even though you're not running it anymore, I would still love to pick your brain about all those things you learned.
While I don't have the Cinnamon Snail food trucks anymore, what I do have now is a mobile food service, which is an experiment in breaking a lot of the rules that generally modern food service businesses operate by. And it's this trailer thing that I built during the pandemic called Galactic Mega Stallion.
I love that name.
It's quite rad. Yeah, so I continue to learn the game of mobile food service. I've been in it since about 2010.
Wow.
Happy to answer any kind of questions your wild and zany heart would like to know.
Cinnamon Snail, I'm assuming that's a reference to cinnamon rolls. Is that correct?
Yeah, the name came about because before I had the truck, I'd been working in vegan restaurants for most of my adult life, and really born out of the desire to get better at cooking for my wife, who's really cute. When I met her, she was the only vegan person I knew, and she survived off of French fries and canned soup.
The junk food vegan, was she one of those?
Yeah, but vegan food back then in the 90s was not as accessible for sure. She was just eating really crappy food, but I really appreciated the ethics behind her veganism. And I was like, man, I really like this girl. I should learn how to make her yummy food. So I started working in restaurants, and then working in restaurants, I myself went vegetarian. And then on the day our daughter was born, I went totally vegan.
Did you grow up in a restaurant atmosphere?
So my mom is a literary agent, mostly for cookbook authors. So
That's
I did
convenient.
grow up going to all these cookbook awards with my mom. I met Julia Child, I remember when I was little, and Yamuna Devi, who was Srila Prabhupada's main disciple. She was her agent, and she would book release parties at our home in our backyard and stuff. That was my introduction, I guess, to like the culinary career. But it really didn't hit until I had the personal desire to get good at cooking because I loved somebody. That's largely propelled me to this day. I'm still trying to figure out just how I can make my kids oatmeal the exact way they like it. Back in like 2008 or so, this restaurant I'd been working at in Jersey changed hands. The person who bought the restaurant ran it into the ground in no time. I'd been working there off the books for years, which is often the case in a lot of kitchens. The week the restaurant closed abruptly was also the week we were closing on a house that we were buying. And it was like, oh man, like I'm going to have to find some way to make a living ASAP. So I started doing some private chefing. And then my wife and I did this little stand at our local farmer's market where amongst things we made were cinnamon rolls, also called cinnamon snails because they got that little spirally thing. Yeah. I just thought it was like a cute name. That's what we ran with for the business. After doing that for a couple of years, we scraped up enough money to buy the most beat up piece of crap food truck on all of Craigslist, which we then like modified and turned into something glorious with help from a few friends of ours.
You got this thing off Craigslist. How much did you have to modify it before you got started?
It's funny. I didn't have big plans of modifying it a whole lot, but it was in rough shape. When I took it for a test drive, we drove it around the block and the entire exhaust system fell off the truck. It was smoking. It was in bad shape and it was already really cheap. It was, I think, 11 grand for this truck. The exhaust system fell off and they were like, we'll take off another $400. I was like, cool. Then I was like secretly working on it in my driveway for months. Some friends came over and saw what I was doing and they were like, Adam, you just gotta fully rebuild it. Like, it's gross in here. I was lucky I had a friend who was a plumber, a friend who was an electrician, and a friend of a friend who could do metal work. By the time that truck initially hit the road, I was probably into it like, I don't know, 24 grand. I mean, wrapping the outside of it and everything.
The outside of your truck, there's a picture. Was that the wrap, the one in the book?
Yeah, so a friend of mine who does graphic design and I went back and forth on that for many drafts. And then there's a couple pictures of the truck in that cookbook, and I think there's two different trucks photographed in that book. Okay. They both have slightly different designs, but similar style and theme. At the time, nobody was doing visually interesting things with food trucks, and I really wanted to do a unique vibe about it. And it's interesting because like my new thing has a very different look. Rather than wrapping the new trailer, I painted it, but then I had these custom designed laser cut steel panels that I riveted onto it. So you're seeing through cutouts, the logo and all this geometric stuff cut into the steel. It has a more refined, fancier look. But yeah, both times I wanted to do something that's look like what everybody else was doing.
And when you bought the truck, did you have to buy all of the different stoves, refrigerators, or did it come with any of that stuff?
It came with really crappy stuff, but I was lucky that I have a very close friend of mine who works in the restaurant supply world. He was able to get me most of what I needed, either for free or really cheap. I know not everybody else has that. And that's one of the benefits of a truck versus a cart. Like the trailer thing I have now, it's super nice, but everything's custom fabricated in it. With a truck, it's a big space and you could put in a slightly different sized fridge or cut the counter a little bit and work around with it. It's a very versatile way for people who are looking to get into food service to start with a lower overhead than building out a whole restaurant.
You make donuts, you make sweet, you make savory, and all of your stuff looks pretty labor intensive.
Yeah, so it is. That's my problem. But on the other hand, that's also what made the food we served from the food truck extremely special.
Did you have to have a commissary kitchen? How long did it take you to prep everything? Did you have different menus all the time?
Yes, we definitely had to have a commissary kitchen. My food is really labor intensive, especially the way I prep it for a mobile food service operation. All these components that the food is made with are prepped in advance. It's really just like final heating and assembly to make it really like rapid to serve a lot of people. You know, all the different sauces and condiments and burger patties and whatever we would prep back at our kitchen, certainly the donuts and stuff like that, so that ideally you could serve a complex, beautiful dish pretty quickly if you have a griddle. Yeah, we had a couple kitchens over the course of our food truck years. We started out with one that was great for our beginning stage. It had a built-in garage. We could pull the truck in at night and stock it. At the very beginning, it was like when I first opened it, I had one person I hired to be like my counter person, and then I would be in the back cooking. But it was so dead in the very beginning for me. I had to like let that person go, and I would get up at 2 a.m, prep all the donuts, drive the truck an hour to vend all day, where I'd be like both handling the customers and cooking the food, drive back and clean it myself and do prep work for the next day. I was never sleeping. Over time, I got significantly busier and started hiring out pieces of it. The biggest difference was when I could finally hire overnight bakers to work with me who I could train to make our donuts and stuff. And that way I could sleep at night. As it evolved and became more and more popular, we eventually got to the point where we'd have on a busier day 5 or 6 people on the food truck working, each on like different positions. One or two people would be handling customers. There'd be like an expediter type person who would communicate with the line cooks, call out the finished orders and like compile them and stuff. Through trial and error, I ended up with a lot of systems to keep it flowing rapidly.
How did you know how much to purchase and to prep for?
I didn't at first. There was a good amount of food waste in the beginning. Unfortunately, this is one of the issues with having a very perishable food product that I would caution people against. As much as it's awesome to do donuts, and at the time when we first started the truck, there were hardly any vegan donuts on the East Coast. Now there's a bunch and it's cool. But the problem with making them in advance that morning is it's always going to be a guessing game about inventory. You're either going to run out of them early or have some left that go to waste. You've not only wasted the ingredients, but like you mentioned, it's pretty labor intensive to prepare these things and costly. That was always a flaw, but as I grew and learned, I figured out ways to make more of the menu outside of the like pastry side of it. I'm never trying to sell a day-old donut to somebody as their first experience of vegan food. As I learned, I would make more of the menu planned to have recuperable elements. If I didn't sell all the scrambled tofu and seitan on the menu, I could reuse that the next day. It wasn't being kept out in a steam table and getting gross. We had a flow of it that didn't open us up to so much of a waste risk. That's disadvantages of a food truck in general versus a regular brick and mortar restaurant. There's a lot of unforeseen bullshit that happens with a food truck, much more so than with a regular restaurant. A regular restaurant does not get a flat tire or the generator breaks and then you have to throw out all of the food in your fridge. Not only does it put you into the shop for however many days it takes to fix it, but now you have food that you've prepped that you have to toss or give away. You have staff that it's very hard to retain because it's less predictable, their schedule, because there's so many issues that come up with food trucks. In terms of being efficient and profitable with a food truck, a lot of that game comes down to being really strategic and planning things so that you're resilient in the face of all the slew of unforeseeable emergencies.
Here in Portland, we have mostly food carts. We have these pods where they're parked all the time. They don't have to worry about, okay, I got to get a permit over on this street and I might get a parking ticket or maybe there's a different event. There could be all these unknowns that can happen. And you have to think in advance, is this going to be a high traffic area? You got to research it. But these pods, they're meant for people to congregate in this one place. One problem, though, we've had in this town is because they're parked, they get broken into a lot. It's a huge problem here. With the truck, I would imagine you can park in a safer space. But again, there's all those unknowns. As far as getting permits, you live in like New Jersey. Did you go to New York?
When I first started, I was looking for a more urban environment and I'm really trying to get into New York City. But they have a very difficult permitting process, one of the worst in the country. The only way to obtain the necessary permits is through the black market, similar to how taxi cab medallions work. In many ways, worse. In the early 80s, when chain restaurants started invading New York City, business improvement districts and lobbied the city council to do something about the huge number of truly at that time kind of gross street food that New York City had going on. It was poorly regulated, like people making these dirty water dogs or whatever. At that time, the city put caps in place. There were a little over 3,000 licensed vendors. And the city was like, okay, if you have one of these permits, you can keep it and keep renewing it every 2 years for what amounted to be like $100 a year. What happened was that created this kind of closed system where you could only get a permit through the city if somebody let theirs expire. And the waiting list became completely full by the early 90s. No one would ever let go of one because they could rent one. Even if they weren't using it anymore, they could rent theirs on the black market for 100 times what they were paying for.
Wow.
So they'd be stupid to let it expire. As time went on and street vending became trendy again in the 2010s, the price for renting a New York City food vending permit was crazy. I think by the time we were stopping doing it, we couldn't even find one for 25 grand to rent every 2 years. That being said, even with the economics of it, it was very shady. You really
Mhm.
have to deal with this mafia type organization that runs the whole permit racket in New York City. So I wasn't able to get one for about the first year and a half. So I started operating in Hoboken, New Jersey, just across the water from New York City. Every town has different regulations and rules. Hoboken had a permit you could get, but you weren't actually allowed to use it anywhere. So there were like a few streets in the entire city. The businesses weren't threatened by the food truck being there, and nobody called the police on you. That's where we would go. But after a couple of years of that, food trucks became very trendy. And it got to the point where we would drive up early in the morning and still have to wait for a parking space to open up. And sometimes there were days we went up there and we'd get there at 6 a.m. and didn't get a parking space until noon. Honestly, the parking situation in Manhattan's not that much better, nor are the rules, because again, like New York City, they won't even sell you the permit. You have to get it on the black market. And then in 2011, there was a popular taco truck in the Upper West Side that the neighborhood it was in, there were some restaurants that felt really threatened by it. They wanted to get rid of this taco truck. Their business improvement district went to the New York Superior Court and found this old law that was on the book from like the push cart era of New York City back in the day. And they found this law. It's written in this crazy old English type of language. It's no huckster or hawker or whatever. And basically what it was saying was that like you're not allowed to sell merchandise from a meter location in the city. The Business Improvement District had the Superior Court update the definition of merchandise to include food. So technically, even with the permits and licenses you needed, there was nowhere in the city, because there's almost nowhere in Manhattan that doesn't have a parking meter. So everywhere you went, you were constantly at risk. If somebody didn't want you there, they could just call the police and have you thrown out. After you spent hours getting the parking spot, there were plenty of times where in the middle of a busy lunch rush, police would come and make us move the truck. And at that time of day, you'll never get reparked again in time to keep serving people lunch, because parking in Midtown Manhattan is like a nightmare for a car, let alone a giant truck. And it's just a real messy regulatory system for New York. You never even know what way they're going to be enforcing it. If you get a traffic cop versus a regular cop versus a health inspector, they're all going to issue you different kinds of tickets or give you different kinds of consequences. It's really difficult to deal with and remain profitable as a food business when you're dealing with that whole extra element of trouble. It's quite exhausting.
That seems like one of the biggest barriers because it's such an unknown and you have to file for these permits ahead of time. Some people will file for a permit for an event, but they do it too late and then they don't have the permit and get kicked out. So, yeah, besides all these types of regulations, there's fire codes and food safety and all of those types of things you have to deal with as well. From all these things we've talked about, were there other lessons that you learned or things that were a complete surprise that happened to you along this journey?
There were a lot of things I learned because aside from working in other people's restaurants in the culinary role, like doing prep, line cooking, chef stuff, and pastry chef stuff, I'd never run my own business. So there were oodles of things I learned the hard way about how to do payroll, why you need to have everybody on the books. And I'll be honest, I'm still learning those kinds of lessons about how to function as a business. So yeah, there were a lot of things that evolved. In the beginning, once I first started hiring people to help me, it was all like people I knew, like people who I'd worked in other restaurants with, or a friend of a friend or whatever, and I'd pay them cash under the table. And as I grew beyond the point where I just had a handful of friends helping me, it really grew. There was a point where we had 65 full-time employees, a bookkeeper, an HR person, and managers and supervisors. And at that point, you definitely need it to be fully legitimate. It was definitely an evolution to get there. At first, the food truck was just cash only. We had a box of cash that all the money went into, and there was no real bookkeeping going on. But it was cool in the sense that it was all friends working with me, like people we had over for Thanksgiving. And I wasn't really worried about somebody ripping me off. But eventually, we were losing money to like people just grabbing $100 out of the register. Because, once you're just putting out job listings on Indeed, who knows who you're ending up with. Over time, we figured out how to do all the things legit. It's a headache, though, figuring out workers' comp and payroll, having an employee handbook with all your sexual harassment policies laid out in it. We actually had a really crazy story. Like a year before the pandemic, you were asking about our commissary. We built out a much bigger commissary because we had a few trucks, a couple restaurants, a catering division. So we built out this huge $500,000 build out. It was rented. We didn't own the building, but we built out this big 4,000 square foot kitchen. It was awesome. Such a nice production space to make a ton of food. But we had this guy come work in our prep kitchen, and he really sucked. He was like an older guy who supposedly had his own food business at some point, and he really wasn't very good. At the end of his first week, we were going to just let him go because it was clear after we gave him a couple days to try out they just didn't have the skill or the hustle to really prep things nicely. But before we had a chance to tell him it wasn't working out, he was, nah, I'm not going to stay here. Bye. And then a month later, I got this call from him and he was like, oh, there was a problem with my pay or something. And I was like, all right, let me know what's up. We'll fix it right now. And he was like, no, you're going to hear from my lawyer.
Ooh.
So this lawyer guy called me, had combed through our employee handbook and found that this clause was missing out of this one thing. And there was some form that I had never heard of in my life that apparently was required. It's basically an official form in New York State to put in writing the agreed upon pay rate or whatever. I brought it to my lawyers and they were like, oh God, this guy again. My lawyers who were only represented restaurant and food service clients. This guy was suing 10 of their other clients. He would go from one restaurant to another, have his lawyer comb through their onboarding packet, find whatever things they could, and encourage the restaurant to settle to make him go away. So it sucked and it was expensive and a bunch of back and forth. And my lawyer time is not cheap. I forget what they were charging me at the time, but it was more than $400 an hour to have them sort this thing out. Finally, we agreed. I had to pay this guy. I forget what it was. It was a lot. I think it was $11,000 or $12,000 to make him just leave us alone.
Did your insurance cover any of that or
no? Oh, no. We agreed on this money, set up this payment plan for it with the guy. And then a year later, the pandemic hit. And a week after the lockdown, my lawyers hit me up and they were like, oh, Adam, there's a problem. Remember that guy? He's back. And actually, he never cashed any of the checks or signed the agreement. And he wants more money from you. And I was like, yes, now I'm closing my business and we're going to be filing bankruptcy. And instead of 12 grand, he's going to get $100 or something. In the end, I ended up settling with him for $1,000 or something instead of 12. But what I did too, I was like, oh, if you're going to be a scoundrel like that and scam me, I'm definitely going to record several really weird videos that I send you with the payment. I made this really weird video where I'm shirtless wearing these glasses. There's overlays of aquatic birds like swans and shit. And I'm talking all about how the money is going to go to pay for your aquatic bird therapies and stuff. So at least I got that out of it because I think that's really important. If people are going to be a scumbag, you got to have the last laugh and talk about waterfowl with them. So there's that.
Yeah, people get into business and they don't know they're going to have all these hassles of one being the manager or the president of the business, and then everything falls on you. And compliance is a huge part of business.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the 70s when I was a kid, my dad had a fish market and a restaurant. Back then, there was no computers and stuff. He kept all of his receipts under the counter in a box, and he was paying his staff under the table. And when this woman that worked for him for years was going to retire, she had no social security because she was paid under the table.
This is one of the realizations I had in that process of becoming a legitimate business from being this like little homemade business that I was doing with some friends of mine. I learned largely the hard way. I never got terribly screwed. I never had some awful IRS audit where they looked at that I had all these people working off the books at one time. But eventually, as I became completely legitimate with stuff, I learned you're not really saving any money by doing all these tactics to try to avoid taxes. I just didn't know in the beginning. And it's a leap of faith. Now you got to get on a payroll processor. You got to have like workers' compensation insurance and all these things. At first, that just sounds scary. Like, how am I going to sell enough food to make that work? But in the end, having things done completely above board, you just sleep so much better at night, not having to worry about that you're going to get caught for doing something wrong. But in the end, for instance, you're paying everybody under the table and showing that revenue coming in somehow, like, you're going to be paying crazy income tax instead of the payroll tax, right? Like, you're still paying, but you're not saving yourself anything, but you're opening yourself up to this huge liability of what's going to happen if you get caught or something. And in the end, when things are totally legitimate, it becomes so much easier to grow your business. And potentially, if you ever wanted to sell the business, do that, have people look at your books and be like, there's all this other money that's not on the books. That's bullshit. Like, nobody serious is going to want to franchise your business or license your business for some use if it's all real crazy like that.
I want to ask you about the transition. You're doing the classes and you have the best social media. You mentioned videos earlier. How did you get started with doing these crazy videos? Do you film them yourself? Do you edit them? I'm just curious about the process.
I do them all myself. They are very over the top. They do take a lot of time, which is why I don't do them very often, which is why my Instagram hasn't grown at all since I stopped running my food truck. It's changed so much the way that social algorithm works. And really, they only reward people who are doing this kind of clickbaity, like very generic content. And while I share a lot of nice food photography and stuff, those platforms are largely video first now and don't really give a lot of reach to like the nice food photography. Probably once a week or a little less often than that, I'll put these real fucked up insane videos together. It's a lot of work to do them. It's really fun and goofy and whatever. They're like every one of those 60-second videos is easily like 6 hours plus of work to do.
They look like it. Are you using your phone? Or are you using different software packages? How do you do all this?
So I film them on like usually a couple DSLRs, like the same cameras that I'll use for both my food photography and my live streamed cooking classes. And there's just a lot of editing that goes into them, lots of weird effects and lots of like finding strange archival footage to put in the background or whatever. And before I was like doing food service professionally, I used to do like audio engineering to make like really crazy dance music. So a lot of the like manipulated, fucked up sounding voices and stuff will be like things I'll bring into a professional audio editing software and apply all kinds of effects to and stuff.
And do you write out ahead of time? Because they're funny. They're very funny.
I just say like a bunch of weird shit and edit it up. I'm not that clever. There's not that much rhyme and reason going on here. It's mostly I just want to have fun and be weird with that stuff for a little bit. It's hard to justify other than that I just do it because I want to do it. I don't think it really moves the needle a whole lot with my business. But some of those videos become paid Facebook ads, and I only run those if they're profitable.
For someone like
Mhm.
me that sees
Yeah.
that, I'm like, oh my God, I got to sign up for this guy's thing. Other people might be like, what a weirdo. But you have in your email something about if you don't like puppies and unicorns or something like that, you're not going to like my food. Or what is it?
Yeah,
What is it,
maybe.
your tagline thing that you have in there?
Something like that. It's funny. I was doing this food hall back in like 2015 in front of Madison Square Garden and above Penn Station. It was like me and Mario Batali and Pat LaFreda and like a couple other like kind of celebrity-ish chefs. And I was like the weird like street food guy who like gave it street cred or something. They wanted to put up these little like thing with a silhouette of the chef and like some little catchy phrase next to each kiosk. And I wrote 10 of them for the company that was doing like all the design stuff. And I was like, pick one of these ones. And that's the one they ended up picking because the other ones were like really freaking weird. But that one was normal. It was like, if you don't like puppies, unicorns, and rainbows, you'll hate my food or something to that effect.
Funny. Before we wrap up, I want to let people know how they can join your university, your cooking university, take some classes and all that. And then you're doing pop-ups in your intergalactic.
Yeah.
It sounds like something that's like out of Bill and Ted. Intergalactic
Galactic
stallions.
Mega Stallion.
Mega Stallion. Okay.
There's a whole page you can link to in the show notes about that project. Because if you're really into mobile food service stuff, it's a very behind the scenes article I wrote about that whole project because it's like real freaking outlandish. Both the way I marketed it, the way I operate with that. It's like a kind of fun project. The other thing is there's tons of people who just want to learn vegan cooking who are not ready for something like Vegan University. That's why every week I publish several new recipes to my blog at cinnamonsnail.com. There's links there to my classes and to Vegan University.
You send out emails that seriously you want to lick the email. It looks so delicious. It's amazing.
The email, Heather. Nobody's stopping you. You're allowed to lick the email if you want.
Do you have any closing thoughts?
Yes. Okay. A very, very big piece of advice to you folks. So I do a lot of culinary consulting for other people's food businesses, both food trucks and restaurants and food manufacturers. And very often I recommend this resource to clients of mine because it's especially for people getting into food trucks who maybe don't have a background in working in restaurants. There's this book called Restaurant Success by the Numbers. And it's a short book. You could definitely read it in the weekend. It's written by, I think he was like a silent partner who was an accountant. He was a partner in a few different restaurants. And it's really good food for thought for somebody who's just getting into food service to like figure out how to do it profitably. So it brings to light a few variables that like a lot of people who are maybe new to food service might not think about. That's a great resource. The other thing that I would like to leave you with, because it's my greatest inspiration in life, and I'd be really remiss if I didn't share about Michael Lotito. And he was a Frenchman and he ate a whole airplane. And then they gave him the Guinness World Records like plaque, and he ate the plaque.
Wow. People are always asking us vegans, where do you get your protein? But I would imagine
airplanes.
Where does this guy get his fiber?
I did read an interview with him and they were like, Michael Lotito, what was the hardest part of the airplane for you to eat? And he was like, the seats. Choking down that foam. Ugh.
Thank you so much, Adam. I appreciate it. And you brought the weirdness, which I love.
Hopefully it was very inspiring and helpful. And if not, then you can just reach out to Heather and tell her, Heather, lawyer up. We're suing. That's it. We've had enough of this podcast garbage.